The truck rumbled to a stop, my hands gripping the worn steering wheel as I maneuvered the 18-wheeler into the narrow parking bay behind the depot. Another long haul down, another few hundred miles behind me. It was early afternoon, a Thursday, somewhere between 2 and 3 p.m. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, though the time didn't really matter anymore. The days bled into each other on the road, and home seemed like a distant, hazy thought, something I could only touch for a brief moment before I was gone again. My name's Kevin Mitchell. I'm 38, but I feel a hell of a lot older. Been driving trucks for almost 15 years now, crisscrossing the country more times than I can count. It's a decent living, keeps the bills paid and the roof over our heads, but it's a hard life too. Long days, longer nights, and the constant hum of the highway that drowns out everything else. My wife, Lisa, is 34. We've been married for 10 years now. I suppose that's a milestone for some couples, 10 years, but for me, it feels more like we've just been coasting along, barely keeping up with the current. We've got 2 kids, Emma, who's 6, and Josh, who just turned 4. Great kids, smart, funny, full of life. But I don't get to see them nearly as much as I'd like. Lisa's the one who's home with them most of the time. I trust her with the kids. Always have. She's a good mother. But lately, something's been off. It's hard to put my finger on it exactly. Maybe it's the way she dresses now when I'm home. More makeup, fancier clothes, like she's trying to impress someone. Or maybe it's the late afternoons at the preschool, where she's been staying late to chat with the director, Jake Dawson. She says it's about the kids, about making sure they're getting the best out of their education. That's what she tells me, anyway, and I believe her. At least, I used to. Jake's a smooth guy, charismatic, runs the preschool where Emma and Josh go. Seems like a good enough man on the surface, always polite when I see him at drop-offs or the occasional school function. But Lisa, she talks about him more than I'd like. Little things, here and there. Oh, Jake had this idea for the kids' curriculum, or Jake thinks Emma is really progressing well in her reading. I know it's his job, but something about it rubs me the wrong way. It's like there's this spark in her voice when she mentions him, something that used to be reserved for, well, me. But I'm probably overthinking it. I've been gone so much lately that my mind starts playing tricks on me. I'm just tired. That's what it is. The road does that to you. Makes you suspicious of things that aren't really there. Still, I can't shake this nagging feeling in the back of my head. I've been on the road for 5 days straight now. 5 days of empty highways, cheap gas station coffee, and sleeping in the cab of my truck. I miss my kids. I miss Lisa too, though I wouldn't admit it out loud. I'm no good with words, not like her. She can tell you how she feels in a heartbeat. I just bottle it all up and hope it'll sort itself out. I threw the truck into park and sighed, rubbing my hands over my face. The phone buzzed in the cup holder, and I reached for it, seeing a text from my mom, Janet. She and Dad lived not far from us, always helping out with the kids when I'm gone. I thumbed open the message, half expecting it to be about some errand I'd forgotten to run. Mom, hey Kevin, just wanted to mention something. Lisa's been at the preschool a lot lately with Jake. Not just dropping off the kids. Hanging around. Talking a lot. Thought you should know. I frowned at the screen, reading the words twice, letting them sink in. Mom's not one for idle gossip, and if she was saying something, it had to be noticeable. I stared out the windshield for a moment, my mind running through every possibility. Lisa said it was about the kids, but was it really? I replied quickly, keeping it casual. Me? I'm sure it's nothing. Just concerned about Emma and Josh. But thanks. I dropped the phone back into the holder, staring at it like it was going to give me the answers. Maybe Lisa was just stressed about the kids. Maybe she was throwing herself into their education because I wasn't around enough. But it didn't sit right. Not at all. The drive home was quieter than usual. No music, no talk radio. Just my thoughts, swirling in the cab like an unwanted passenger. I kept thinking about Jake, about Lisa, about the way she smiled when she mentioned him. I didn't like it. Not one bit. But what could I do? I was gone most of the time. I wasn't there. Maybe I was the problem. I pulled into our driveway just as the sun was dipping low behind the trees. The house was quiet, too quiet. Lisa's car wasn't in the driveway, and the kids weren't in the yard. I glanced at my phone again. No new messages. I wasn't ready to go inside. Not yet. I needed a breather, something to clear my head. So, I drove over to the local hospital, stopping by the pharmacy to pick up some Advil. My head was pounding, and I didn't want to go home with a migraine. As I walked in, I nearly bumped into someone coming out. I looked up and saw Megan Dawson, Jake's wife. She worked as a nurse at the hospital. Small world, I thought, though I wasn't sure if it was fate or some twisted coincidence. "Hey, Megan," I said, trying to sound casual. "How's it going?" Megan looked tired, really tired. Her dark hair was tied up in a loose bun, and she wore the kind of expression that only comes from too many long shifts and not enough sleep. She gave me a half-hearted smile. "Kevin." "Hey," she said. "It's fine, I guess. Just work, you know?" I nodded, but something about her tone made me pause. She didn't seem like she was just tired from work. There was something else there, something simmering beneath the surface. "You doing all right?" I asked, leaning against the counter. Megan hesitated, her eyes darting away for a second before meeting mine again. "Yeah, just, you know how it is. Things get complicated. Work's been rough. Home's a bit rough too." There it was, the crack in her voice, the same one I'd heard in Lisa's not too long ago. I could feel the tension in the air between us, unspoken but heavy, like we were both dancing around something we didn't want to say out loud. "Jake still running the preschool?" I asked, pretending like I didn't already know. Megan's smile faltered. "Yeah, still running it." She didn't say much else after that, but her expression said enough. There was something wrong in her marriage too. Something off. I paid for the Advil and headed out, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that things were unraveling, slowly but surely. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe it wasn't just me. Maybe Lisa wasn't the only one who'd changed. Maybe Jake was more involved in all of this than I'd ever imagined. As I pulled back into the driveway at home, the sun finally set, casting long shadows across the yard. Lisa's car was parked out front now, and the house lights were on. I took a deep breath before getting out of the truck, bracing myself for whatever waited for me inside. It was going to be a long night. The subtle cracks in the life I thought I knew had started to show, but I wasn't ready to face them yet. Not entirely. Something told me, though, that I wasn't the only one living with secrets. And whatever was lurking beneath the surface was about to make itself known. By the time I stepped through the front door, the sun had already set, casting long shadows across the yard. The house was quiet, too quiet. Lisa's car was parked outside, the kids' toys scattered across the lawn, untouched. Inside, the lights were dimmed, and I could hear the faint hum of the TV in the living room. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood there for a moment, listening. The soft clinking of dishes told me Lisa was in the kitchen, probably cleaning up after dinner. It was late, just past 8 p.m. I could smell the faint scent of spaghetti, now cold, lingering in the air. I walked into the kitchen, finding Lisa at the sink, her back to me, washing the last of the dishes. Her hair was tied up, and she was wearing that old gray t-shirt she always wore around the house. For a moment, everything felt normal, like the routine we had settled into over the years. But that feeling didn't last long. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "Hey, you're home. How was work?" "Long," I said, grabbing a glass from the cupboard and filling it with water. "Anything exciting happened today?" "Not much. Took the kids to preschool, ran a few errands. Nothing out of the ordinary." She paused, drying her hands on a towel, turning to face me. "Oh, I have a meeting with Jake tomorrow about that new reading program for Emma. He thinks it'll really help her get ahead." There it was again. Jake. Always Jake. I nodded, taking a sip of water. "He seems pretty involved, doesn't he?" Lisa shrugged, as if it was nothing. "Yeah, he really cares about the kids." I tried to push the nagging feeling out of my head. I didn't want to deal with it tonight, not after the day I'd had. But it was hard to ignore. The more she talked about Jake, the more it felt like there was something else going on, something just beneath the surface that I couldn't quite put my finger on. We didn't talk much after that. Lisa finished cleaning up, and I retreated to the living room, where the kids had already fallen asleep on the couch, their little bodies sprawled out under a blanket. I smiled to myself, watching them for a moment before gently scooping them up, one by one, and carrying them to bed. By the time I crawled into bed myself, it was close to 10 p.m., and Lisa was already asleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the day pressing down on me. There was something gnawing at the back of my mind, a suspicion I couldn't shake. That night, I barely slept. The next morning came quickly, too quickly. It was a Saturday, and the sun was already climbing over the horizon when I dragged myself out of bed. Lisa was up before me, as usual, getting the kids ready for the day. Emma and Josh were excited about some playdate Lisa had set up with another family, but all I could think about was what she had mentioned the night before. Another meeting with Jake? I stood at the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee, watching as Lisa moved around the house, her hair perfectly done, makeup on, dressed in a blouse and jeans that looked far too nice for a casual Saturday morning. "You look nice," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She gave me a quick smile. "Thanks. Just meeting with Jake after I dropped the kids off." "It's nothing." "Uh-huh." I didn't say anything else, just sipped my coffee, the words Jake said to me the day before still rattling around in my head. I wanted to ask her more, to dig deeper, but something told me I wasn't ready for the answers. "Not yet." She grabbed her purse, kissed the kids on the forehead, and waved at me from the door. "I won't be long." I nodded, watching her go. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my gut. I couldn't shake the image of Lisa smiling, her eyes lighting up when she talked about Jake. There was more to it than she was letting on, and I was starting to think I had been blind to it for too long. Later that afternoon, I decided to take the kids to the hypermarket. Figured it'd be an easy way to pass the time and keep my mind off everything. Emma needed new shoes, and Josh was always happy if I bought him something with dinosaurs on it. A distraction sounded like exactly what I needed. The kids were giggling in the back seat as we pulled into the parking lot, chattering about some cartoon they had watched earlier in the morning. I tried to focus on that, on their innocence, on how simple things used to be before all this doubt started creeping into my head. Inside the store, I grabbed a cart, and the kids immediately started climbing on the sides, riding along as we weaved through the aisles. Emma spotted a shoe section up ahead and pointed, her face lighting up. "Dad, can we look at those ones?" "Sure, kiddo," I said, trying to keep things light. "Let's check him out." We made our way over, and I was about to start looking at the sneakers when a song came on over the store's speakers, some generic pop hit, but it wasn't the song itself that caught my attention. It was Emma's reaction. She giggled, nudging Josh, and mimicked a sound I hadn't expected. "Ooh, ah," just like Mommy does when she talks to Mr. Dawson. I froze, my hands still on the shoe rack. I turned to Emma, trying to keep my voice steady. "What was that, sweetheart?" Emma smiled innocently, completely oblivious to the weight of her words. "Mommy makes funny noises when she talks to Mr. Dawson, like ooh and ah." We heard her the other day when we were waiting for her outside his office. My heart stopped. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she had just said. Funny noises? My mind raced, piecing together everything I'd been avoiding up until now. Josh, eager to be part of the conversation, joined in. "Yeah, Daddy, it was like music. Ooh, ah." I felt my grip tighten on the cart, but I forced myself to smile. "All right, you too. How about we finish up here and get some ice cream, huh?" They cheered, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing inside my head. I guided them through the rest of the store in a daze, my thoughts a tangled mess of suspicion and dread. By the time we were in the car, I couldn't shake it. Lisa had said it was about the kids, about their education, but now I wasn't so sure. The kids had just innocently dropped a bomb on me, and I wasn't sure how to react. I couldn't exactly grill my 6-year-old for details, but I knew one thing for sure. Something was off. That night, I couldn't focus. Lisa came home late again, saying she had stayed back to discuss more plans with Jake. She didn't notice the way I watched her, the way I stayed quiet, letting her talk. I didn't say much, just enough to keep the conversation going, but my mind was miles away. Later, after the kids were asleep, I stepped outside to clear my head. The night air was cool against my skin, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside me. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen, my thumb hovering over the contact list. I needed to talk to someone, needed to make sense of all this. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. Mom, just talked to a few of the moms at the preschool. They're saying Lisa's been spending a lot of time with Jake. Thought you should know. I sighed, rubbing the bridge of my nose. It was happening again. The whispers, the doubts, the questions I didn't want to ask but couldn't ignore. Even my mom was hearing it now. I typed out a quick response. Me thanks, Mom. I'll talk to her. But would I? Could I even bring it up without everything falling apart? I stood there, staring up at the sky, feeling the weight of the unspoken words pressing down on me. I wasn't ready to confront it yet, but soon, I'd have to. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when the cracks were already starting to show. The night stretched on, and I knew one thing for certain. The more time Lisa spent with Jake, the deeper this hole got. And sooner or later, something was going to give. It was Monday morning when everything really started to come into focus. I had been mulling things over all weekend, replaying the conversations, the little hints, the looks that didn't quite make sense until now. The funny noises from Emma's innocent mouth had been the final blow, a sound so innocent and yet so damning at the same time. Lisa had left early that morning, something about running errands. She was always in such a rush these days, like she had somewhere to be that was far more important than home. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of black coffee, staring at the clock. 8:05 a.m. The kids were already at preschool. The house was empty except for me and the growing knot in my stomach. I wasn't a confrontational guy by nature. I'd rather avoid a fight than start one, but the weight of everything was pressing down on me. Still, I wasn't ready to blow it all up. Not yet. I needed more, something concrete. I wasn't about to tear my family apart on suspicion alone. So, I came up with a plan. It started simple enough. Lisa's car was sitting in the driveway, her keys hanging by the door. I knew she wouldn't be back until later in the afternoon. I grabbed the audio recorder I had picked up the night before, a small, discreet device that could fit in the palm of my hand. I didn't like the idea of spying on my wife, but she had forced my hand. I needed answers, and this was the only way to get them. I walked out to the car, my hands steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. I slipped the recorder under the driver's seat, hidden just out of sight. It was set to activate whenever the engine started, recording everything that was said inside. I figured if there was anything going on, this would be the way to catch it. Lisa had been spending a lot of time with Jake, and I had a feeling their conversations weren't just about the kids. The morning air was crisp, and I could hear the faint hum of traffic on the highway as I closed the car door behind me. Standing there, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I'd just done settle on my shoulders. I wasn't proud of it. In fact, I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't live in the dark any longer. It was around noon when I got the first taste of confirmation. I had been running errands around town, trying to keep busy to distract myself from the gnawing doubt. But it wasn't easy. Everywhere I went, my mind circled back to Lisa, back to Jake. What was going on between them? Were they meeting right now? Laughing behind my back while I played the fool? That's when I decided to stop by the cafeteria on Main Street to meet up with Dad. He had texted me earlier, asking if I had some time to catch up. The idea of having a casual coffee with my old man seemed like a good way to clear my head, or at least get some perspective. He was already seated by the time I arrived, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of him and a newspaper spread out on the table. I walked over and sat down across from him, the familiar scent of bacon and hash browns wafting through the air. "Hey, Kev," Dad said, folding the paper and setting it aside. "You look like you haven't slept." I let out a tired chuckle, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, well, it's been a rough few days. You know how it is." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes studying me for a moment. "You want to talk about it?" I hesitated, glancing around the busy cafeteria. The sounds of clinking dishes and muffled conversations filled the air. "It's Lisa," I finally said, keeping my voice low. "Something's off." Dad raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Off how?" I looked at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my finger. She's been spending a lot of time at the preschool. Too much time. And not just with the kids. With Jake, the preschool director. Dad nodded slowly, letting my words hang in the air for a moment before responding. Your mom mentioned something about that. Said some of the parents were talking. Figured it was just gossip, but if it's bugging you this much... It's not just gossip, I muttered. Emma and Josh overheard something. Something inappropriate. Dad set his coffee down, his expression growing serious. You think she's cheating? The word hit me like a punch to the gut, but I nodded. I don't know for sure, but I've got a bad feeling. Dad was quiet for a minute, his gaze steady. Look, son, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If something's going on, you need to figure it out. But don't fly off the handle just yet. Get your facts straight before you do anything. I nodded, appreciating his calm, practical approach. It was the same advice he'd given me when I was a teenager, back when my problems were simpler and life didn't feel like it was crumbling beneath my feet. I've already started looking into it, I said, my voice low. But I need to be sure. I'm not going to blow everything up over a hunch. Dad gave a small nod of approval. That's smart. Just don't wait too long, Kev. If it's true, you need to protect yourself. We talked for a bit longer, but the weight of our conversation hung between us, unspoken. I left the cafeteria feeling a little better, but the knot in my stomach was still there, tightening with every passing hour. Lisa got home just after 3 p.m., and the moment she walked through the door, I could tell something was different. She had this energy about her, this glow, like she was on top of the world. She was smiling, more relaxed than I'd seen her in weeks. Hey, how was your day? She asked, slipping off her shoes by the door. Fine, I said, keeping my voice even. Yours? Good, she replied, too quickly. Just busy. You know how it is. There's always something to get done. I didn't say anything, just nodded and watched her move around the kitchen like everything was normal. She grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, took a sip, and leaned against the counter, chatting about something she'd seen on TV earlier. Some reality show she liked to watch. But all I could think about was the recorder in her car, the truth it might hold. Long day? She asked, her tone light, like she didn't have a care in the world. You could say that, I muttered, leaning back against the counter opposite her. Seems like you've been busy too. Always running around these days. Lisa laughed lightly, but I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes. Yeah, just trying to keep up with everything. You know how it is. Yeah, I do, I replied, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Lot of stuff to stay on top of. She didn't catch the edge in my tone, or if she did, she ignored it. Instead, she finished her water, tossed the bottle in the recycling, and disappeared upstairs to change. I stayed in the kitchen, gripping the counter, my mind racing. I had to be careful. Blowing up now wouldn't solve anything. I waited until Lisa had gone to bed that night. It was late, past midnight, when I finally slipped out of bed and crept downstairs. The house was dark, quiet except for the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet. I grabbed Lisa's car keys and headed out to the driveway, the cool night air stinging my skin as I unlocked the car. The recorder was still where I'd left it, tucked under the driver's seat. My hands trembled as I pulled it free and slipped it into my pocket. I headed back inside, moving quickly through the house, locking myself in the office. My fingers fumbled as I connected the recorder to my laptop, the small screen lighting up with a blinking green light. I hit play. At first, there was nothing. Just the sound of the engine starting, some rustling, the faint hum of the radio. But then, I heard it. Lisa's voice. She was talking to someone, and though the audio was muffled, I could make out the words. Thanks again for today, Lisa's voice came through, soft but clear. It's just really nice to have someone to talk to. There was a pause, and then another voice, Jake's. His tone was smooth, too familiar. Of course, Lisa. You know I'm always here for you. I enjoy our talks. My stomach twisted. I leaned in closer, listening as the conversation continued. They talked about the kids for a bit, but it was all surface level, just small talk. And then, the tone shifted. I've been thinking about what we talked about last week, Jake said, his voice dropping lower. about how things have been difficult for you at home. I clenched my fists, my blood running cold. Yeah, Lisa replied, her voice hesitant. It's just, Kevin's so busy all the time. I feel like we've grown apart, you know? There was silence for a moment, and then Jake spoke again, his voice laced with something I hadn't heard before. Something dangerous. You deserve more, Lisa. You deserve someone who makes you feel appreciated. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling with rage. That was all I needed to hear. My suspicions were no longer suspicions. This was real. It was happening. Jake was making a move, and Lisa was letting him. Hell, she was practically inviting it. I sat there in the dark, my mind spinning, trying to figure out my next move. Confronting Lisa wouldn't do any good. Not yet. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to gather more, to build a case that would leave no room for denial. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal that ran deeper than that. It was the kind of disrespect that shattered everything. The next morning, I couldn't look at her the same way. Lisa was getting the kids ready for preschool, her usual routine, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She caught me watching her from across the room, raising an eyebrow. What's up? You look off. I forced a smile, shaking my head. Nothing. Just thinking. About what? I hesitated, then shrugged. You know life. The kids. Work. She smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Well, don't stress too much. It's just a phase. Things will settle down. I nodded, but inside, I knew better. Things weren't going to settle down. They were about to get a whole lot worse. The days passed in a blur, but my focus never wavered. I watched, I listened, I waited. The audio recorder became my lifeline, my way of staying one step ahead. Every time Lisa left the house, I'd retrieve it, listen to the recordings, and then put it back. Each conversation with Jake confirmed what I already knew. They were growing closer, pushing boundaries they had no business crossing. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And when it did, I'd be ready. The walls were closing in, but I wasn't going to let them crush me. Not yet. This game they were playing? I was 2 moves ahead, and when the time came, I'd make sure they both knew exactly what they'd done. It was Wednesday morning, and the weight of the previous few days had settled into something solid, cold, and calculated. I had listened to enough of the recordings to know the truth. There wasn't any need for more. Every second of their conversations had confirmed what I already suspected. Lisa and Jake were involved, way beyond what I could tolerate. The words they exchanged weren't just friendly banter or professional conversations. They were the kind of words that ripped through you, leaving no doubt that your marriage was hollow, a sham being propped up by routine and lies. But I wasn't going to explode. That wasn't me. I wasn't going to confront Lisa, scream, or pack up my things and storm out. Not yet. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about control. I needed to handle this carefully, not just for my own sake, but for Emma and Josh. They deserved better than a public mess, and if there was one thing I could control in this situation, it was how this all went down. I had already made my decision. Divorce. There was no saving this, no talking it out, no fixing the pieces that had shattered. But I wasn't about to go to war without a plan. That's how I found myself sitting in the office of Michael Lewis, the local family lawyer, 2 days after I'd last listened to the audio recordings. Michael's office was unremarkable. Dusty law books lined the shelves, his desk piled with papers, like a man forever on the brink of drowning in paperwork. But he had a reputation for being ruthless, and I needed that on my side. It was 10 a.m. when I walked into his office, and the air outside was already heating up. Summer was on its way, but inside the office it felt stifling, almost too quiet. Michael sat behind his desk, adjusting his glasses as he glanced over some papers, probably thinking about his next case. He barely looked up as I stepped in. "Kevin, right?" he said, finally acknowledging me with a sharp glance. "Come on in. Have a seat." I sat down, feeling the tension in my shoulders, my nerves wound tight. This was real now. No more guessing, no more delaying. I was about to set the wheels in motion, and there'd be no stopping them once they started. "I'm not going to waste your time," I said, leaning forward slightly. I need to file for divorce. Michael nodded, not surprised. He had the look of a man who had seen the end of many marriages. That's what we do here. What's your situation? I hesitated for a moment, then laid it all out. No details spared. She's cheating on me. I've got proof, recordings. She's been seeing the guy who runs our kids' preschool. Been happening for a while, though I just confirmed it recently. Michael's eyebrows lifted at that. Recordings, huh? That'll make things easier. Judges like proof. There's more, I continued. There's been talk going around the preschool. Other parents are starting to notice something between them. Lisa Benson and John Monroe were just talking about it when I picked up the kids. They're seeing what I've been seeing, Jake spending too much time with some of the moms. Michael's expression tightened with interest. Gossip's useful, especially if it corroborates your recordings. What else? I clenched my jaw, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Even my kids have picked up on it. My daughter, Emma, told me she and Josh heard their mom making funny noises with Jake when they were outside his office one day. I laughed it off when she first said it, but it's eating me alive now. She's probably hearing things a kid should never hear. Michael tapped his pen on the desk, nodding slowly. And Jake's wife? Is she in the picture? I leaned back in the chair, running a hand over my face. Yeah, Megan. She's a nurse. From what I've heard, she's been depressed lately, probably has no idea what's going on. I ran into her a few days ago, and she looked worn out, like something's been dragging her down. Michael scribbled something on a legal pad in front of him, then leaned back in his chair. All right, first things first, we'll start with gathering everything you've got. Financial records, the recordings, any communication between you and your wife that might help establish where things stand. You'll want to keep this under wraps for now, so she doesn't get the upper hand. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in. This was it, the beginning of the end. And I had to keep playing my role, pretending nothing was wrong, all while this plan unfolded quietly in the background. Michael laid out the basics, filing for divorce, drafting up an initial custody agreement, and preparing for any potential disputes over property or finances. It was all business, cold, practical, and unemotional, just what I needed. By the time I left his office, I had a folder of documents and a head full of instructions. But more importantly, I had a plan. That afternoon, I went about my day like nothing was wrong. The sun beat down as I walked through the town, passing the hardware store, the cafe, and a few familiar faces that nodded my way. Everything felt normal, but inside, I knew better. Everything was about to change. I spent the rest of the day running errands, keeping my head down, making sure I wasn't drawing attention. It wasn't until later, when I found myself back at the preschool, picking up Emma and Josh, that the next phase of my plan started to come together. The parents were gathered in clusters, chatting while they waited for their kids. I spotted a couple of familiar faces, Lisa Benson and John Monroe, standing near the entrance, talking in hushed tones about something. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I walked closer, I caught a few words. Spending a lot of time with the director, Lisa was saying, her voice low but not exactly discreet. I don't know, it just seems a bit off, you know? John nodded, glancing toward the preschool doors. Yeah, I've noticed it too. It's like they're always together. Makes you wonder. I kept my distance, pretending to busy myself while I overheard the rest. The rumors were spreading, just as I had hoped. Soon, it wouldn't just be whispers. It would be common knowledge. That's when I saw Jake Dawson step out of the building, his usual air of confidence about him. He spotted me almost immediately, his expression shifting to one of mild surprise. Kevin, Jake called out, walking over with that easy smile he always had. Long time, no see. Haven't seen you here in a while. Thought you were still on the road? I turned, forcing a calm smile, though I could feel the tension building inside me. Yeah, work's been keeping me busy. But, gotta make time for the kids. Jake nodded, his eyes flicking toward the other parents milling about. Of course. I'm glad to see you're back. The kids seem to be doing great. I've been meaning to talk to you about Emma's progress in reading. She's ahead of the curve. I could feel the sarcasm bubbling up, but I held it in check. Yeah, Lisa's mentioned that. She's always talking about how much time you've been putting in with the kids. Real dedicated. Jake chuckled, oblivious to the edge in my voice. Well, it's my job. Gotta make sure the little ones are set up for success, right? I nodded, my smile tight. Right. Good to see you're so involved. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes that flickered for a moment. He shifted on his feet, glancing back toward the building. Well, I'll let you get to it. If you ever want to chat about Emma or Josh's progress, don't hesitate to drop by. I'll keep that in mind, I said, my voice flat. He walked away, that same confident stride carrying him back into the building. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, my jaw clenched. He had no idea that everything was about to fall apart. The following days passed in a blur of routine. I kept things normal, playing the part of the unsuspecting husband, keeping up with work, and quietly putting the pieces of my plan into place. Every time I saw Lisa and Jake together at the preschool, I felt that familiar twist in my gut, but I kept my cool. No public drama, no scenes. Just quiet, methodical planning. The rumors about Jake continued to swirl. I made sure of that, dropping subtle comments here and there, never too obvious, just enough to stoke the fire. And it was working. I could see the way people started looking at him, parents whispering behind their hands, teachers casting sideways glances. The pressure was building, but Jake remained blissfully unaware, walking through the halls of the preschool like he owned the place. And Lisa, well, she kept pretending everything was fine. I could see it in the way she moved around the house, going through the motions but never really connecting. She had no idea that I was 10 steps ahead, quietly dismantling the life she thought she had. By the time Friday rolled around, the tension had grown thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel it, see it in the way people interacted at the preschool, in the way Lisa looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. But I was always paying attention. It was a quiet Thursday morning when things really started to shift. The air felt heavy with the kind of tension that you can't quite pinpoint, like a storm building in the distance. It had been a week since I started planting those subtle suggestions among the parents and school staff. By now, the rumors were spreading like wildfire, and I knew they were beginning to have an effect. I pulled into the preschool parking lot, the familiar hum of the engine fading as I sat there for a moment, letting everything settle. It was just past 8:30 a.m., and the sun was already climbing in the sky, casting long shadows over the playground. The kids had just gone inside, and parents were starting to filter out, leaving behind an odd stillness that hung in the air. I wasn't here for the kids this time. I was here to watch the cracks in Jake's perfect little world start to form. The gossip had spread faster than I anticipated. Lisa Benson, John Monroe, and a handful of other parents had been more than willing to whisper about Jake's too friendly relationships with some of the moms. Word had even started making its way back to the school board. Subtle concerns about professionalism, nothing too direct but enough to raise eyebrows. Jake hadn't realized it yet, but his foundation was crumbling beneath him. I didn't have to be there to know that the pressure was mounting on him. But today, I wanted to see it for myself. As I got out of the truck and made my way toward the building, I caught sight of Jake through one of the side windows. He was talking to one of the other teachers, his body language tense, his smile a little too tight. Good. He was feeling it. Even from here, I could see that things weren't sitting as comfortably with him as they once did. I stepped inside the building, making my way down the hall, blending into the morning routine as if I belonged. No one questioned me. I was just another parent here to drop off his kids, nothing out of the ordinary. But I wasn't here for a casual visit. Later that afternoon, I put the next phase of my plan into action. Sitting in the quiet of my home office, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the audio files I'd recorded from Lisa's car. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A snippet of conversation between her and Jake that was just incriminating enough to raise suspicions without revealing everything. It was perfect. Just enough to make Megan start asking questions. I composed a simple email, attached the audio file, and sent it anonymously. Nothing fancy, just a few words to plant the seed. Subject: you should know. Body: maybe you should ask Jake what he's really been doing during all those late meetings. Then I hit send. The moment the email left my inbox, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about precision, about making sure every piece fell exactly where I wanted it to. Megan had been kept in the dark for too long. She needed to know the truth, and this would be the first step toward that. I had no doubt that when Megan heard Jake's voice on that recording, things would start to unravel for him in ways he couldn't control. It wouldn't take long before she started questioning every late night, every meeting, every whispered conversation that didn't quiet it up. The next day, I could feel the tension the moment I stepped into the preschool. The usual hum of parent chatter was gone, replaced by uneasy glances and hushed conversations that stopped the moment I walked past. I didn't mind. This was exactly what I had hoped for. As I stood near the entrance, waiting for the kids to finish up, I noticed Jake coming down the hall, his face a little paler than usual, his eyes darting around like he was expecting something to happen. He didn't see me at first, too caught up in whatever stress was clawing at him, but when his gaze finally landed on me, I could see it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He made his way over, his usual confident stride now a little less assured. When he reached me, he forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Kevin," he said, his voice strained, though he was trying hard to sound casual. "Didn't expect to see you here again so soon. Everything all right?" I gave him a cool, measured look, shrugging. "Just picking up the kids. Thought I'd see how things were going." Jake shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Yeah, things are fine. Just, busy as always." There was a pause, the air between us thick with something unspoken. "You sure?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You look a little off." Before he could respond, there was a brief interruption. One of the office staff appeared down the hall, her face serious as she called out to Jake. "Mr. Dawson, the board would like to have a word with you." "They're in the conference room." Jake froze for a second, and I could see the panic flare in his eyes. He quickly forced another smile, his voice cracking just a bit. "Guess duty calls." "Yeah," I said, fighting the urge to smirk. "Guess it does." He nodded stiffly and turned to leave, heading down the hall toward what was surely the beginning of a long and uncomfortable meeting. I watched him go, feeling a wave of satisfaction ripple through me. This was only the start. It didn't take long for the email I'd sent to Megan to take effect. A few days later, word started filtering back through the usual channels. Megan had been asking questions. Not directly, not to Jake's face, but quietly, subtly, the way you do when you're trying to unravel something without letting on that it's falling apart. It started with little things, comments to mutual friends, mentions of late-night meetings, a few awkward glances between Jake and Lisa that Megan had clearly noticed. The email had done its job, and now Megan was on the hunt for the truth. By the following week, Jake's paranoia had reached new heights. I overheard some of the teachers talking in the hallway, their voices low but not quite low enough to keep me from catching the gist of it. "Have you noticed how weird he's been acting lately?" one of them whispered. "Yeah," the other replied. "He's been skipping meetings, avoiding eye contact with the board. Something's definitely up." The cracks in Jake's armor were showing, and they were only getting deeper. It wasn't long before Megan's suspicions came to a head. I heard from one of the parents that Megan had confronted Jake about the email, about his late nights, about the things that didn't add up. The rumors had finally reached her, and now she wanted answers. Jake, of course, had tried to talk his way out of it, but I knew Megan wasn't the type to let things go once they'd gotten under her skin. She wasn't going to let him slip by without a fight. A week later, I saw the real panic in Jake's eyes. It was a Friday morning, and the air was thick with the heat of an early summer day. I was back at the preschool, standing in my usual spot near the entrance, watching as parents came and went. Jake walked by, his face pale, his eyes darting around like he was being hunted. He spotted Lisa from across the hall and quickly made his way over to her. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I caught enough to understand the tension between them. "You're pulling away," Jake said, his voice low but urgent. "What are you scared? He doesn't know anything." Lisa's expression was strained, her eyes flicking toward the door as if she were expecting me to walk in at any moment. "I don't know, Jake. Kevin's been acting different. Maybe we should stop." Jake scoffed, his voice dropping even lower. You think he can take me down? He's a truck driver, not a damn detective. I watched from a distance, my blood simmering as I took in their whispered conversation. They had no idea that I was miles ahead of them, that their little secret was already unraveling faster than they could control. Jake's arrogance was going to be his downfall. He thought he was untouchable, that no one could challenge him. But he was wrong. I wasn't a detective, but I didn't need to be. All I needed was time, and time was working in my favor. By the time the weekend rolled around, the pressure on Jake was palpable. Megan was questioning him at home. The school board was beginning to take notice of his erratic behavior, and the parents were whispering more than ever. His world was collapsing, piece by piece, and all I had to do was watch. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. It happened on a Wednesday morning, just when I thought the dust might settle. Lisa received the subpoena. I knew it was coming. After all, it was part of the plan. But she didn't. Her expression when she opened the envelope, the slow, dawning horror as she read the words, was all the confirmation I needed that she knew it was over. For a brief moment, she stood frozen by the kitchen counter, staring at the document in her hands. The kids were still in bed, oblivious to the storm brewing just feet away. I watched her from the living room, waiting. The silence was thick, broken only by the rustling of the paper as her hands trembled. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, panic and anger warring on her face. You filed for divorce? I nodded, staying seated. There was no point in playing dumb now. Yeah, Lisa, I did. Her face flushed, and she shook her head, almost as if she couldn't believe it was real. You can't do this to me, Kevin. You can't just take everything away. I'm not taking everything away, I said evenly, keeping my tone calm, which seemed to unsettle her more. But I'm not about to let you walk all over me either. She slammed the papers down on the counter, her voice rising. I'm not giving up the kids. You can't take them from me. I'm not taking them from you, I said again, though this time with a little more edge. I'm asking for custody, Lisa. I've got enough evidence to back it up, and you know it. Her eyes widened in shock, and I could tell she hadn't expected that. She didn't think I'd actually go through with it, much less come prepared. There was a brief flicker of fear, and then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by anger. You think you're going to win, she spat, her voice tight. You think you can just take my kids and walk away like none of this happened? I don't think, Lisa, I replied, standing up slowly. I know. Court day came faster than I expected, but I was ready. I sat on one side of the room, my lawyer, Michael, next to me. Lisa sat across from me with her lawyer, a man who looked far too polished for someone defending an unwinnable case. Her expression was a mixture of defiance and desperation. She wasn't going to go down without a fight. The courtroom was quiet as the proceedings began. We moved through the usual formalities, the back and forth between the lawyers, the presentation of evidence. And then, as expected, the recordings came into play. I had been careful to keep the most damning parts of the conversations between her and Jake. Those moments that made it clear the affair wasn't just emotional, but physical too. There was no denying it now. Her lawyer tried to push back, but it was weak, grasping at straws. He argued that none of this made Lisa a bad mother, that the affair shouldn't affect custody. But the judge wasn't swayed. Jake's involvement was the final nail in the coffin. The investigation into his conduct at the preschool had already begun, and by the time we reached court, it was clear his professional life was on the line. The board had found enough to suspend him, and his career was in free fall. Megan had filed for separation, and now, Lisa's future was crumbling along with his. When the judge finally gave his ruling, I was awarded primary custody of Emma and Josh. Lisa would have visitation rights, but they were limited. Her affair with Jake had done more damage than she had ever anticipated. Outside the courtroom, we walked in silence. Lisa's parents were farther down the hallway, whispering to each other, their faces tight with worry. Lisa stood with her lawyer, avoiding my gaze, clearly stunned by the outcome. Finally, she approached me, her voice small, almost pleading. Kevin, please, can we talk about this? I turned to face her, calm and controlled. What's left to talk about, Lisa? You made your choices. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't. I cut her off, my voice low but firm. You know, I thought about making a scene. About yelling. About blowing everything up in front of everyone. She blinked, taken aback by the calmness in my voice. But then I realized, I continued. Watching everything fall apart without saying a word? That was better. Lisa's lip trembled, but no words came. She just stood there, defeated. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked away. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to the channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story.